Okay, so in the last video, we got our API set up and all we have at this point is a view that takes in this Python list of dictionaries and it converts it into JSON data. So this is what we currently have for our response. And what we want to do now is actually install and start using the Django REST framework. So this is a toolkit built on top of Django and it's specifically designed for building out APIs. So it's really going to enhance our experience. And right now our API is very simple. We just get some JSON data, but when it comes to things like authentication or serialization, which we'll get into later, the Django REST framework is really going to help us with this and enhance a lot of what we're doing here. So once we get it installed, we're going to need to modify our view here and change up a few things. So to get this installed, I want to pull up the documentation here. So just go ahead and into any search engine, type in Django REST framework. And this should pull up the documentation. If not, just go ahead and go to this link directly. Go ahead and add that into your browser. And this is the documentation on how to use the Django REST framework. So I'll go into this step by step here. So I'm not going to do a full breakdown of the documentation. We'll just address what we need as we get there. So the first thing I want to do here is go into the installation process. So go ahead and go into that link right there. And let's start with a pip install here. So I don't need these two right here. So we'll just pip install the Django REST framework here. So we'll start here. So I'm going to open up my terminal and VS Code is being a little bit weird. So I have to type in Python-M before I actually write in the pip install. If you don't have any issues with it, just type in pip install and then the rest of the command. So I have to do this. So ignore this part if you don't have this issue. So Python-M and just start it right here. So pip install Django REST framework. So that's going to get it installed. And if we look in the documentation, so I'll just close this out here, we want to go into the next step of this installation process. So if we scroll down here, it's going to tell us to add in REST framework into installed apps. So installed apps is inside of settings.py. So we'll go into settings.py here and let's just add this down here. So we'll just do REST_framework. And now this is officially going to be configured into our Django application. So now we can actually use everything that the REST framework gives us. So we'll close this out here. And what I want to do now is actually customize this view here. So at this point, this is a typical Django view, and we want to use the views that the REST framework tells us to use, or at least customize them the way that it's telling us to do things. So in here, I'm going to zoom out enough so I can see these tabs here. We're going to go into tutorials, and we're going to go into request and response. So we are going to be using function-based views. There's also an option to use class-based views, but because we're using function-based views, we're going to stick to that because that's what we've been doing in the tutorial all along. But if you're ready to use class-based views, go ahead and use those. I'll just mention those or just point out certain things as we go over them. So once we customize these views, we're going to have access to something called request.data. We've already seen request.post, so we should be familiar with that, but this is a different way of actually getting our data from any put or post request that we send. So we're also going to have access to this request method here. At this point, we're using JSON response. So we're going to modify that right here. So let's just continue here. We'll just keep scrolling. And this is what we want to do. So wrapping our views here. So if we're using a function-based view, we're going to use a decorator. So this is going to turn it into a REST framework view. If we're using class-based views, you're going to add in this mixin right here. So the documentation references both options here. So if we scroll down here, what we want to do is import the API view decorator and also response right here. So I'll try to zoom in a little bit. So we want to use these two, and then we need to wrap any view that we have with these decorators. So the decorators are simply going to tell us, or we specify what kind of request method can be sent to this view, and then we use the response method. So let's go ahead and do this. So I want to open up my views here. And the first thing I want to do is run some imports. So I'm just going to do from REST_framework. And we're just going to import, let's see. So I actually need to go into REST framework.decorators. And we're just going to import API_view. Now the next one is that response method. So we're going to do from REST framework.response, and we're just going to import response. So to actually use this, we're just going to wrap this view now. So we're just going to do @API_view, And this decorator takes in a list here, and this is going to be a list of strings. So we need to specify the type of methods that we can send. Remember, we have get methods, post methods, put, delete, and a whole bunch of other ones. So in this case, I want to specify this as a get method. So we're just modifying this view. So I need to wrap this with a decorator. And then this response, I actually want to change this to be response here. So with a capital R. So response. And I can also get rid of safe now. So we don't need this for the response method. So we can use this because of this decorator. So let's take a look at the difference here and see what happens. This actually gives us a lot of functionality. We're going to see different things and what it actually gives us here. But at this point, let's just save it. And let's take a look here. So if I refresh this, look at what we have now. So we have this interface here, and we have some styling here. And the REST framework basically gives us this customized look here. So we can just view our data differently. It formats it for us, and it tells us a little bit more about what's actually happening here. So it's not too much at this point, but this does get very convenient later on. So if we want to see this in raw JSON format, we could just click on that, and that's going to add in that parameter. So this route here could be called just like any other API route. We just hit this route, and then if you wanted to get some JavaScript information, this UI would not interfere with anything. You would still get back this information. So what we want to do next is actually get some projects from our database and return those back as JSON data. So in this case, because we are returning back a list of Python objects, we are going to need to serialize this information. So if this doesn't make sense to you right away, you'll see it in a second, but serialization is basically the process of converting our data here. So we're going to take our Python objects, and these are going to need to be converted. So we're going to need to serialize them so they become JSON objects. So to do this, let's go ahead and go in here, and we'll go into serialization. So in this case, we want to serialize our models. So we're going to work with model serialization. So let's see. Somewhere down here, working with serializers, using model serializers. So this is going to be a lot like our model forms, where we're going to create a serializer, and we're going to specify the model that we want to serialize, the fields that we want to output, and it's going to take any model that we give it, and it's simply going to convert it. So a lot like the model form where we specify the model and the field itself. Obviously, there's more attributes than just that, but these are the bare minimum. So we create the class, we use class meta here, and we build all that in. So this is probably pretty familiar to you at this point. So let's go ahead and start building it out, and it'll make sense once we see it. So we already created the serializers.py file. If you haven't already, just go ahead and build that in or add that file. So in here, we're going to need to make a few imports. So the first thing is going to be from REST_framework. We're just going to import serializers. So import serializers. And then we also need to import our models here. So we're just going to do from dot. Actually, we are going into the projects file here. So we're going into projects. So we're going to do from projects and then dot models. I just got so used to adding in dot models, and we want to import the project model. So now that we have these two imports, we want to create our serializer. So we're going to create a class here. And just like the model form, I like to use the convention of specifying the model and then just writing serializer. So in this case, this is going to be a project serializer. It's going to serialize the project model. Now in here, we're just going to do serializers. So we just made this import, so serializers, and we want to use model serializer. So you can actually serialize a lot more than a model. You can manually just create, or you can, I guess, serialize some Python dictionaries or whatever you want. But in this case, we are just serializing a model. So there's a lot more to it than just model serializers. So we want to create the class of meta here. We specify the model. And in this case, we imported projects, so we want to use that here. And we also need our fields. So just like the example we saw in the documentation, we could use a list and specify each field that we want to output. At this point, let's just do _all and just serialize all the fields. So this is a model serializer. So it's going to take this model here. So we'll go into projects, and it's going to convert this into a JSON object. So to actually use this serializer, I'm going to save everything. Let's go ahead and import this into our views. So we're going to do from.serializers, and I'm just going to import project serializer. And I also need to import my models. So we're going to do from projects.models import project. Okay, so we have those imported. The next thing I want to do is actually create a route that's going to get those for us. So we want to query the database. So in this case, we want to create a view, and we're going to call this get projects. And we need to pass in request here. It's a standard view at this point. We want to return, and then we're going to use the response method here. So I'm actually just going to remove JSON response because we're no longer using that. And in here, to make this the view with all that formatting and to actually be able to use response, we need to add in our decorator. So API underscore view. And now we want to specify the actual methods that we can take here. So we can create a list here, and I'm just going to say get. So that's the only method at this point that we want this view to accept. So if somebody sends a post request, it's not going to work because we're just simply not allowing it. But if we want to add it, we could just do post like that. So there's no reason for us to use that, so we're going to leave it out. And now what we want to do is just query our projects. So we're going to use the project model here. We're going to do .objects and then .all. So we're getting all the projects. Now, normally we would just take our projects and output them here. Usually we use a context dictionary, but this will not work. So we need to pass in serialized data. So it needs to be JSON data. So what we're going to do here is we are first going to use our serializer, and we're just going to set the variable of serializer, and that needs to be AI like that. And we're just going to set this to project serializer. So in here, we're going to pass in projects. So this serializer is going to take this query set and turn it into JSON data. So we need one more parameter here, and we need to let it know, are we serializing one object or are we serializing many? So many is going to be set to true, and when we get back a single object, we're going to set this to false. So we're just going to change that up based on what we're actually serializing. So to actually use this is a class right here. So it's an object, or I guess just a class. And to get the data out of this, we need to use the data value. So we could just do serializer.data. In this case, I want to leave the serializer if I want to access anything else in here. And we're just going to do serializer.data like that. So that'll give us the actual serialized projects. So if I save this now, I just need to go ahead and create that URL path here. So let's create a new path, and we're going to pass in the actual path here. So this is going to be API/projects. So the actual view, this is going to be views.getProjects, and that's it. So I'm not going to specify a name unless we actually need that. For now, I'm going to leave it like this. So we have the view that queries the projects and it serializes that data, and this is what we're going to output. So let's go ahead and see what that does for us. So in this case, I'm going to go to API/projects, and let's take a look. So if I scroll down here, we are going to see a list of objects here. In this case, it's an array now, and we can see all of our objects here. So we see our title for the e-commerce website, all this data was serialized, and we just got it back in JSON format. So that's what that serializer did for us. If we try to just pass in that project or the list of projects, it wouldn't work. So serialization takes care of that, and it formats this data for us, and we can now start calling this with any JavaScript here. If we want to call this API, we can actually start getting this information. So the next thing I want to do is serialize a single object. So we want to create a route here, and then we're going to start working on relationships. So in this case, notice that when we get the owner, we're not getting the owner object here. So we can't just use the dot notation that we used before where we did something like project.owner.name. In this case, we just have an ID. So we're going to work on fixing this so we actually get an owner object there. And same with the tags. We just get the tag IDs. So only the actual project was serialized. So we're going to fix that in the next video. But for now, let's go ahead and create another view here. So what I'm going to do is copy this one, and we're just going to paste this down here. So this is going to be get project. So we're going to take out S here. And in this case, we're going to do get, and we do need to pass in the ID. So we'll just do PK, and we're just going to do projects. In this case, that's going to be a single project, and we're just going to do ID equals PK. So we're querying a project. Serializer is going to be project serializer, and we're passing in a single project now, and many is going to be set to false. So now we want to return back just one object, and then For that response, we're just getting the same data. So we need to configure the view here. So we'll go ahead and just add in a comma here. Let's just copy this, paste this below. And in this case, instead of saying project and then the ID, because we're trying to make this a little bit more RESTful, even though we're not going to focus on that so much, we're just going to pass in the ID like this. So it's going to be projects and then the ID, which we're going to set that to a string value. So in this case, we're going to throw in PK, and then that's going to be get project right there. So let's go ahead and test this out. Let's save both. Let's make sure everything's working. And let's just grab the portfolio website. So I need to get this ID here, and we're just going to go ahead and paste that in here. So here we go. Now we don't get back a list. We got back a single project. So this is an object now, and we can get back information about a specific project. So that's it for this video. We introduced the Django REST framework. We set it up. We configured our URLs here. We modified our URLs to use the decorator and this response method, and we serialized some projects. So we converted that data, and now we want to work on relationships. So that's going to be in the next video.